Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today I'm joined by my lovely co-host here, Dan, chairman of the board, as we start our latest episode, episode 25? Is this 25 already? 24, not yet
I don't
25.
know. I'm going to say
Episode
yes.
24 of Corporate Cardboard. Dan, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very good, thank you. And thank you for introducing me as lovely. That's very nice of you. Yeah, very good, Mackenzie. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm excited to talk about all sorts of new games. You've got some ones that I'm very, very interested in. So let's start talking about them. Dan, what's the first game that you've been playing?
Okay, so yeah, I've got 3 really good games that I'm happy with. They're all pretty dry, so yeah, be prepared to take a drink of water or something. But the first one is The Magnificent, which is a dice drafting game, which is a mechanism I generally love. A lot of my favorite games are dice drafters, and I think that's kind of puts it in one or two camps. Either average games or even good games aren't going to cut it because the competition is so tough, or it's got to be really amazing to be amongst those greats. And this is definitely the latter. This is a fantastic game that I've had on my shelf for a long time. Didn't manage to get it played. I wasn't really sure what to make of it, but it's actually quite a simple game where I suppose the twist on this one is that when you draft dice, oh, so you got rated as 6 here. I'm quite surprised. So yeah, when you draft dice, the following dice, as long as you draft the same color, the kind of pip values combine with each other. So say you draft a 3 the first time, and then you draft a 4 the second time, then your value for a green action would be 7 because you're adding the pips together. And then you're going to use these dice to either collect gems, which can give you a bit of a boost. You can use them to put on these displays where you acquire cards, and then like certain cards might say you need these gems, or you need maybe if you want to do a bunch of different cards all at once, you can pull up a bunch of pips and then activate loads of them at once. I'm not explaining this very well because but there's this. It's actually quite an easy game to understand, I think, once you play it, because there's only like 3 actions you could take. It's like collect gems and go around this rondel, potentially collect these tents that you can put on your board. You can place these polyomino tiles on your personal board as well, or you can put on a display, I suppose, or put on a performance. But I did like the way that all 3 of these different aspects of the game synergize with each other. There's limited options. I think you only get like 4 actions per turn, and I think there's only like 4 rounds in the game or something. But I think my favorite thing about it was the fact that how the card hand management works, because these cards are going to give you like a benefit when you draft a dice and they place them on the cards. But also when it comes to the end of the round, you have to basically get rid of one of these cards, which will have a scoring condition on it. So it might say things like get 7 points for every complete row you have on your player sheet, or for every one of these shapes you have X amount of points. So I love that kind of spinning those plates of what action am I willing to get rid of, which scoring criteria am I going to build towards, which ones are going to hold on till the end of the game and get half points for rather than the full points. Just a really well put together little concise game that I thought I was very impressed with. I was taught this by somebody else, and that really prompted me to get it straight back off the shelf and get it play my own copy, and very happy with it. What made you feel? I see you got your rating middling there, about 6 out of 10. Why didn't you think this one was up there with the good ones, or the great ones, I suppose?
I'll be honest, it's been about 2 years maybe. I played this one right when it came out. A friend had a copy of it. He wanted to try it, so I gave it a try. And it was good, but it wasn't anything super... It didn't really draw me back into it. I had no intention of going out and getting a copy myself. And usually, if that's the case, the rating's probably not going to be super high. We're always looking for new games for the library. So if something is great, I'm probably going to go get it because I think it's worth showing other people. In this case, I felt that, yes, it did have some really interesting choices when it came to figuring out what scoring criteria you were going to stick with. And then the dice drafting itself with, I believe it, for this one, it's if you take really high values, you get like mad punished, right? You take a huge...
You have to pay
negative.
for it, yeah.
That's what it is. So I thought that was interesting, but I don't think it was up there with some of the more terrifying ones, like something like Coimbra or Tekenu, where you're making the most with these dice, but I don't know how to describe it because it's really been such a long time. I can't tell you. Nothing really drove me to pull it back out or ask for it again, unfortunately. So that's why I got the 6 rating, just because it immediately left my mind after I played it.
Okay, yeah, interesting. I can kind of get that. I mean, But I did quite like that idea of, because you could really kind of build things and take a massive turn.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I liked about it, because you could line up everything and then trigger all the things at once to get a whole bunch of, again, money and things. And I said that thing you mentioned about, yeah, you could take all the great dice time and time again, but you're going to have to pay big time for it. And especially in the first couple of rounds, I thought the management between your money and the higher pit values was really tight. So I did like that. But I was really impressed with it. I mean, it was way better than I thought it was going to be. So yeah, I loved it.
Maybe this is one that I need to go back and try again. Was there a specific setup or a specific intention you had while you played this that made you want to go back and play it right again?
I don't know. I think what left such a good impression of me is because I went to a games night, and there was
Mm-hmm.
like, I didn't know what I was going to play, and somebody said, "Oh, I've got this." I thought, "Oh well," and it turned out to be way better than I thought it was going to be. But the second play I loved as well. But I don't know. I just love. It has a lot of things that I tend to like. You know, I love dice drafting. I love the kind of economic thing with the dice drafting, and I love that longer term planning where you have to plan a few turns ahead, thinking next round I'm going to go for this goal. I'm going to remove it and going to try get that card to replace it. I just thought it come together really nicely. So yeah, I thought the whole package was good, to be honest.
I think the way that you're describing it here makes me want to give it a try again. I know a friend who has a copy of it still, so maybe it's one I'll revisit with this insight in mind. Maybe it was different because it was my first time playing it and just kind of was falling through the different actions. I don't think I did particularly poorly, though. I think I understood the game as a whole. But yeah, I'll have to give this one a try again and see if it does stand up to some of those higher tier dice drafting games.
Yeah, I'll say you do, because it doesn't take too long either. I think it was only like, yeah, you can get a 2-player game done in about 75 minutes, which is quite nice.
Sounds good. Anything else to add on the Magnificent, Dan?
No, I like it. I like it a lot. And people say the board is really dark and ugly, but I thought the board looked great.
I think the game board and the whole art aesthetic is lovely. Did you play with the snow expansion? It's like
no, I haven't. No, I haven't got.
It looks so cool. It's got like this very nice frozen motif to it. So the entire thing is like this nice snowy white. It's really cool, and I think it pairs really well with that dark board. Pretty sweet.
Yeah, it really does. It looks great on the table, I think.
Fantastic. So that is our first game. That is the Magnificent. The first game that I have to talk about is a solo-only game that I was very interested in based on the designers. They have designed some of my favorite abstracts when we talked about last week in War Chest. This is going to be Resist. So Resist is a solo game where you're going to be playing as the resistance fighters, and you're going to be trying to take back your homeland. And so you're doing this with a group of rebels. And so you can either be a hidden rebel when you play a card from your hand, or you can be a revealed rebel. However, every time that you decide between these two options, if you do end up revealing your rebels, they're going to essentially have to go back into hiding, and they're going to become hidden. They're going to get shuffled into this separate deck. So in gameplay terms, what this is it's a deck building game where every time you play a card, you decide to use a weak version or a powerful version, and then the powerful version, if you use that effect, it'll disappear. You'll need to hopefully get cards back. So you start with a lot of different cards in this game, but as you play through mission after mission, you're going to suffer a lot of attrition. Your deck is going to get smaller, and it's going to get weaker over time. However, you need to manage those cards very carefully, because you are eventually going to get into positions and situations where you just need to complete an objective, or you may lose the game. There are 2 lose conditions of the game. One of them is losing 2 missions. You have these 4 missions at the top here, and if you ever fail 2, you lose the entire game. If you fail 1, it flips face down, doesn't refresh, so it also limits your options, and so that can be quite a bummer. The other way that you lose is if citizens die. There are some of these characters, civilians. There are some of these characters in those face down blue cards at the top that will actually kill civilians, and if you let that happen enough times, you automatically lose. So you're always thinking about balancing this prevention of one of those loss conditions to improving your own chances of actually completing the missions. The more missions that you complete, the higher your scores at the end of the game. And ideally, you're going to finish the entire game. You can quit whenever you feel comfortable with it if you don't think you can complete another mission, but it's a solo game, so you're probably just going to do your best to get the best score possible. So I don't think there's really a reason to quit. You're always going to be wanting to push yourself forward. So that being said, I do want to talk about that interesting mechanism here, this self-weakening mechanism of revealing. So I think that you having that option is a really interesting one, because you always have that choice of using some superpower and using a weaker version. Eventually, though, if you will have to use one of those more powerful versions. So you'll get to a point in the game where your deck is very small and very weak, and it doesn't feel particularly great when you're in those later turns in the game, and you're fighting these missions that are significantly harder than the ones you started with. It almost feels that you're underprepared for all of these missions that you need huge preparations for. And I think that actually goes back to these blue cards. So as I mentioned before, when you are going to be fighting a mission, you'll reveal these blue cards on the top. Some are going to kill civilians, but others are actually going to give you new cards in your deck if you defeat them. So you are choosing to ignore the other negative things and get a benefit. But unfortunately, ignoring those negative things can cause you to lose the entire game. So it's a balance of using your powers to do everything, using it to do maybe half of the things, and managing the different negatives as much as possible. The thing that kills me though with this is you have no control on whether or not these cards come out early or later. In the first couple of games that I played, these cards that as rewards, if you took them out, gave you more great cards in your deck, they didn't show up until maybe the fourth or fifth mission. So by the time they ended up actually showing up, I didn't have the resources available to actually take them out and fulfill the mission and mitigate all the other disaster. So I was playing with basically a terrible deck for the entire first portion of the game and had no real options to increase that ability. And that's totally fine because it is a very short game, but I do think that it's something that could happen in repeat plays. So something to be aware of if you are trying this one is you don't really have a control when those options to improve yourself happen, but you always do have that control as to when you're going to hurt yourself by revealing those cards. So something to keep in mind here. So I wish that there was a more visible choice on when you can upgrade specific missions. And maybe there are missions and scenarios that you can pick that will let you upgrade for sure. But the main way that you are going to be getting new cards into your deck is by defeating these jailer cards, which are those blue ones, and they will give you new cards. So I wish that there was some way that you could guarantee some deck building potential. So that's Resist. Those are my initial thoughts. I've played 3 times so far, the standard solo. There's also a scenario book for it, which seems very interesting, having specific setups. And I'm curious to see where this one lands after trying out all of the different scenarios for it. Dan, have you ever seen this one? Is this one that you were interested in?
I didn't know anything about this game at all. No, first I've been exposed to it, to be honest. Yeah, I don't really know what to say. I mean, you're saying the cards that are distributed to you, is that literally a make or break thing? You're going to get the right cards, you're going to have a chance to win. You don't get the right chance, you're doomed basically.
That's kind of what it feels like, because the missions ramp up in difficulty and ramp up on the amount of cards that they're getting, so it makes them more challenging. So if you don't get any of those engine building cards early, you are pretty much set up for failure, which is pretty unfortunate.
Right.
Yeah, there's no really big fail forward system. And every time you do dip into your pool and use one of your stronger cards, that card is permanently lost, which is a pretty big hit because you only have so many cards and it's so difficult to actually get another one back into your deck, which is pretty frustrating.
And how long did you say it was?
How long did I say? About half an hour, a little bit less than half an hour. So it's a very short game, which with this sort of randomness, I think is okay. If it was maybe super long and I was having to trudge through, that would be worse. But I think in this case, because it's a little bit shorter, maybe you're pushing your limit as much as possible. It doesn't feel as bad. And if you do get a bad shuffle, you could just reset. You have a lot of flexibility with that solo setup. We have a good question here from Original Maverick. Just got the copy of Resist this week. Looking forward to getting to the table. Did I find that it took up a lot of table space? I would say no, actually. It's pretty manageable. You're going to keep things in sort of this small grid. It's going to be a big square. The rulebook lays it out pretty well. I would say it's about the size of maybe... I'm trying to think of it. Maybe it's the size of a Spellground mat, if that helps. So that's what I play on. It's maybe 2 feet by 3 feet, 3 feet by 3 feet. It's around there. I would say 3 feet by 3 feet. So I don't think it takes a terrible amount of table space. You are going to, like this picture says, you're going to be stacking cards on top of each other like this. So a lot of your space is going to be that area in front of you. So, but everything else I think fits pretty nicely on the table. Yeah, but the theme is very interesting. I'm very excited to go into the scenario book to actually learn more of the historical background for this. The biggest thing that drew me was that game design. Anything else on this one, Dan?
No, not at all. No. So I didn't know anything about it at all, so there we go.
So that is Resist, our second game. All right, Dan, what is next? What else have you been playing?
Yeah, so I managed to play a few games of Bruxelles Imperial, which is a game, moderately popular at the moment, I suppose. This is a new 4X Euro game. Has a lot of shared DNA with Scythe, which is obviously a very popular game. At least in the way you're taking your actions. I think you've got 7 actions in this one. all very simple in their own right, but another action is to invest in another part of the board, which makes each other action better as you go on. So you're moving cubes from one part, unlocking points, and then making other actions more efficient. And with a 4X game, you probably know what you're doing. You're going to start with a basic capital, then you're going to start building farms. You're going to start getting more and more materials and resources to build more buildings. You're acquiring these painting cards, which give you like permanent upgrades, make your buildings more, efficient and make them pay out more, that kind of thing. You have a military side of the game as well, as you'd probably expect, where you can pay resources to deploy military units onto the board to, again, unlock you more victory points and to traverse around the board and to basically discover these, like, what do you call it, like fog of war tiles, basically, where you flip them over and you might have something interesting on the other side. They do lots of different things, such as just giving you set collection points. Some of them might say, this is a particularly fertile bit of land. If you build here, you'll get more resources, that kind of thing. But some of that, I thought, well, the bit I quite liked was the fact that some of these tiles on the map were like, they were called expedition tiles, where you could actually use your military strength to fight against the game to basically get end-game victory points. So if you're not such a conflict-driven player or gamer, or your group isn't that way inclined, for a 4X game, this one is quite actually, you can be quite amicable and not be so destructive in each other's faces. And the map itself is extremely modular, so you can actually tailor that to your needs as well. So you could have like quite a spaced out map where you've got a lot of room to grow, or you can do like a nice tight one where within a few turns you're going to be stepping on each other's toes. But another thing I liked about the combat in this game was the fact that when you actually go and attack other players' buildings, you don't destroy them and they don't become yours. It's like as long as your piece is stood on their building, then you can use it. So you have a kind of it's like a temporary thing, basically. So as long as I'm on it, I can exploit the resources, and then I can go off again somewhere else. And as soon as I move off that tile, it's yours again. So I thought that's a nice little touch there that strikes a good balance between, if you want to be in each other's faces, then you can do that, but the punishment isn't too bad. And the rest of it, you're basically is broken down into 3 eras. You're trying to achieve these objectives. By the time the players have achieved the 3rd objectives, which are going to get more progressively difficult, having X amount of these buildings down, have these military units deployed, have a number of these paintings, you can trigger the end of the game, and the player with the most points will be the victor. So I was quite apprehensive going into this game because I think we talked about it on this show, actually, Mackenzie, about maybe 6 months ago, maybe longer than that. We were talking about a game called Dark Ages.
Yeah.
And it was a game that I was really looking forward to because it was being advertised as a 4X Euro game. And after that game, it really fell flat for me because it had so many problems in terms of just dragging its heels. It really took a long time to get going, very slow and plodding, and it felt like the first third of the game was just building a bog standard engine. This one, it seemed to, I explained in my review, so if you want a full breakdown, then check out my review. But for me, this one seemed to break down every single obstacle that would have made it a stalling game. Before you know it, you've got great upgrades. Before you know it, you've got a ton of resources. So for me, the resources in this game were not like they weren't like laborious. It wasn't work to get things done. It was fun. And the main resource for me was time. How quickly and efficient can you use these actions to get the most points by the time the game ends? And for me, that is exactly the right balance I was looking for. It didn't need to be a big slogging, churning game. It's about an hour and a half. And for the amount of stuff that's going on here, I was very impressed. And I've played a few games of this now at the 4-player count, which is the maximum, and it works so nicely. Turns are nice and snappy, just the right amount of interaction. Everything's inviting at all times, and I'm very impressed. So that's Brazil.
Awesome. So you said that collecting the resources is exciting. I want to know more about that. Can you elaborate more? Because that's pretty telling to an amazing game. If the most mundane task is something interesting.
Well, I suppose what I mean by that is that, like, you don't have to jump through all the hoops like you do with a lot of games to get basic things done.
Oh, that's okay.
You have lots of like flexibility early. Like before you know it, it might cost you like only 1 resource to get a farm, and you build that farm, and that automatically produces you 2 resources, and then you can maybe buy a really cool painting with that. So it's like early in the game you can do cool things. It's got a good like it always feels like you're moving forward in this one, and it's not stagnant. So for me, it always felt like you were, again, pushing forward, and it always felt good, and it felt like, oh, I can't wait for my next turn because I'm going to do this. So that's kind of what I mean by that.
I think that's a great description. It reminds me of the feeling in something like Clans of Caledonia, where on the first turn of the game, you have like $80, so you can do whatever you want. And you start putting out these things that immediately produce things for you. So it feels good to make progress. So this sounds pretty compelling. Any other things that we need to know about what makes this game stand out, or something you're going to go back to?
Well, a big thing I mentioned before is the time, because normally you'd think of this game taking 3 hours. You know, if you described everything that was going on, you'd say this is going to be a longer game than it is. But this is genuinely a 90 to 100 minute game at the full player count. So that in itself is going to be a massive, obstacle flattened out to get it back to the table. Each game, the different discovery tiles are going to be different. I mean, they're not game breaking, but they're interesting enough. They got unique player powers, so depending on the character you're playing, they do slightly different things. It just has a lot of things in its favor, and it does what it does really well. This is really a Euro 4X game, so yeah, it does what it says on the box.
Super exciting. This is one I'm definitely going to be on the lookout for. This is Brazil Imperial. Awesome. Anything else to add?
Just happy with it. Yeah, exactly what I was looking for.
Perfect. Awesome. Super excited. Okay, my next game here is one that I've been waiting for a long time. This is Trudvang Legends. So if you're unfamiliar with this game, this used to be a project by Simon and Eric Lang, and it went through some huge development redos and redesigns. So they took the entire core system, basically said they weren't happy with it, and then changed it completely from the ground up. So it made about an extra 1.5 year delay on the backers actually getting the game. The reason that it pulled me in initially, though, was it promised to have a bag-building Quacks of Quedlinburg battle system implemented with a campaign story that had a saga system or legacy system. I don't remember the name of it. The whole premise, though, is that you have this giant board that has these slots inside of the board that are going to change after each mission. There are towns that you can visit. There are permanent rules for the game. The things that you're going to reset not reset, but that's going to stay from campaign game to campaign game. And all you have to do is open up the board and it's all there. The locations on the map are going to change. There are extra things on this sideboard that may affect the minions and the different areas that you visit. So there's a lot of cool ideas that can happen with this, and I can see this being used in a lot of games in the future. But that is just the legacy system as a whole. How does the game actually hold up? Well, unfortunately, I think that this game is suffering from a lot. And the biggest thing has to do with the combats and the punishments of losing, if that makes sense, the consequences of your combat, and then the cyclical nature of the game without having any real incentives or negatives to doing things, if that makes sense. It also has this really weird engine building that you have to do every round with like a mini grind each game, because you have to reset your bag at the start of each mission. And that's not something that I'm a big fan of. The other thing that I want to talk about, though, are some good things. First, I'll talk about the item system. Now, as I mentioned before, it's going to have this bag building system. So let's see if I can find a picture here of what this looks like. All right, well, I'm just going to talk about it. So the first thing is that each character is going to have some form of item that they're going to start with. And as you play, you're going to discover more and more items that are going to go into your item stack. And I actually really like this system. So every time that you're in a fight, you can use the top item by spending the C resource. And when you do that, you use the ability and you slide the item to the bottom of your backpack, essentially. And you can only ever use the item that's on the top. So as you are getting more and more equipment, it's going to go into this deck, and you're going to cycle through all of your different equipment every time you fight. I really like that concept because you're able to set up some cool combos. You know what's going to be coming up as you're comboing off your items, and you can always guarantee that the order of which these things are going to appear. So I really like that system. The other thing I really enjoy is the buff tokens. Whenever you play in a combat, you're going to be pulling out all of these tokens from your bag. And if you get more than 3 tokens that you cannot allocate or are misses, essentially, then you're going to receive some sort of penalty. So if you get 5 total tokens, you have to stop drawing, and then you're going to get a penalty. But there are these tokens here at the bottom, these red ones and these blue ones, that give you bonuses and negatives to your pull result. If you have a bunch of these blue tokens at the top, if you decide to stop early before you get into that 4 or 5 bust value, then you're going to get the bonuses of all of these blue tokens that you unlock. unlocked in addition to any of the abilities that you've activated. If you decide to keep on going though and you do bust, some in-game effects might give you these red tokens and you'll get negative effects. So you have some pre-printed on your board, but you can also gain more just by pushing your luck or even activating abilities on your own cards that are going to give you extra tokens. So I like that there is some mini engine building that can happen during the fights for visiting different locations, and then you can use it every single time that you're taking some form of battle or skill test. So those are the big things here. The negatives, though, that I want to talk about have to do with the combat and the big bag reset is really annoying. So at the beginning of each game, you're going to have to reset your entire bag to your starting runes. You may have an item or two that give you extra runes, but then you have to actually do a little bit of grind, defeat some characters in order to gain the C resource, visit the different towns to add more of the different tokens to your bag. It's going to increase the amount of tokens you're able to pull before busting and trigger different abilities when you fight. However, you have to do that every single time, and it's pretty annoying because you're doing the same things every time. I would much prefer if there was some way to keep that bag from mission to mission, and I think that makes sense. Something like Arkham Horror, the card game, does this, where when you add new tokens to your bag, they do stay there. The other thing that's really annoying is if you are defeated in a combat, your health sets to 6, and you draw this card that is a weird spell. If that it's what are the from the mythology here, but this weird spell is going to be shuffled into your deck of combat cards. When it shows up, you have to allocate runes to it, and then you'll get a reward for defeating it, and then it's removed. And that's the only consequence that you have for failing, is adding this card into your deck. But it's not necessarily a bad thing because it just gives you more spaces to allocate your runes to, which means that you're probably not going to be doing as much busting as you were before, which actually strengthens your character the more that you die. And every time that you die again, if you already have a weird card, nothing happens. And if you die without having a weird card, it just gets shuffled back into your deck. So there's no real big consequence to losing a fight or winning a fight. So you're kind of just going over and over and over again until this happens, until you've finally completed it. You've died enough times in order to kill the characters. So it doesn't feel like there's any real consequences. It has that meandering sense, which I really dislike in adventuring games, where you're just doing things until they're completed, as opposed to making decisions because of the consequences that can occur, if that makes sense in an adventure style game. The last thing that I want to mention is, because of that cyclical process of the only consequence of dying is getting those weird cards, you can find yourself in situations where you are in a fight, you have to do this fight, and then you get to a state where you cannot leave the fight because you are going through this cycle and you're in an infinite loop of just pulling until something happens. I got into a situation where every time I revealed a specific symbol in a combat, I had to add a miss token to my bag, and I couldn't leave the combat. So I just played infinite times until I killed the character, because I wasn't just going to sit there and do this whole process again and again until I finally killed that character. So it was so weird that in the very first mission, there were infinite loops that you could get yourself stuck in. So really soured me on that first experience. I ended up actually resetting the entire first scenario and playing through it again. But overall, Trudvang is one that feels like it's story first, and the story is not particularly strong. The combat is cool, but inconsequential. So it's not something that I really want to go back to. And there are some neat systems here that I think could work well maybe in another game. I don't know if this is one that I'm going to hang on to, because they just delivered the core box right now. So maybe expansion stuff might be something that bolsters this, but that's really far reach. And this is a campaign game. So I imagine you have to finish this before moving on to that. So I don't know if we hold on to this one and then sell it when all the stuff comes back, or if this is one that I'll give a try out some more. I'm really torn on this one. Have you heard about this game at all, Dan? Does this interest you? Does it excite you at all?
It doesn't excite me at all, no, but I remember this one. I remember this one being advertised and it doing very well on Kickstarter. I didn't realize it was postponed, like you mentioned. And was that due to feedback from the fan base? Was it, or?
It's so interesting because the thing that actually convinced me to get this game in the first place was the feedback. There were a bunch of people that got a chance to play the prototype of the original version at Gen Con, and they said that they had a great time with it. The combat was cool, interesting story points that were cool and had real consequential choices. So I was very excited to try it based on that recommendation. And then after the campaign ended, about a year afterwards, they said, hey, we're resetting the whole thing. So I was like, oh my gosh, why is this happening? I don't know if it was the designers, if it was CMON as a whole. I think there's probably more to it. And I'll be honest, I get a lot of Kickstarter emails. So most of them that detail like development processes, I just delete. So maybe somebody can illuminate me more in the comment sections, but I'm not sure what exactly happened here, but I'm not really pleased with the results, unfortunately.
No, sounds a bit, like you buy one thing and then they give you something else.
Yeah, it's pretty unfortunate. The other thing that really grinds my gears is one of the cool reasons to get this on Kickstarter was you could get these plastic tokens with their upgrade tokens. Like for Quacks, you would get the ones from BGG Store, or for Wonderlands of War, the amazing chips. Those are Kickstarter exclusive bonuses. So you don't actually get them until the second wave, which is when all the expansion stuff comes in. So if you're going to play the game and figure it all out, you don't have those bonus tokens. You're playing with the dinky little cardboard ones. So it's just like, oh my gosh, now I have like even less of a reason to play this right now because I know that I'm going to have a more gratifying, at least tactilely experience in the future. So it's so frustrating.
How long's that? How long's the gap to the next wave?
Who knows? They're still developing it. It's not in production at
Oh,
all. So it's going to be 2 years at least,
oh
I
my
imagine.
goodness.
So I think that this one hangs out on the shelf. I don't know. I'm not particularly excited to play more of this. I have Etherfields that I can play right now. That's taking up my attention span for these longer campaign games. And this is one that I don't know if it'll come back to it anytime soon. Really disappointed in this one, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, so sad. That's Trudvang Legends. If y'all are having any success with this in the comments, please let me know. But I am unfortunately very disappointed in this one. Trudvang Legends. That's the second game that I've been playing. Dan, let's lift up the spirits a little bit. What's the third game you've been playing today?
So my third one is another one that I was really impressed with, actually.
Good.
This is Bruxelles 1893. And another game I think we talked about on the show really early when we did Corporate Cardboard was the card game version of this called Brussels 1897, which I liked, but I always wanted this one, but it was quite hard to come by. This is the board game version, and I have to say it's a lot better than the card game version, even though there's a ton of crossover between the two. This is a worker placement game, but the actual worker placement spots that you're fighting over changes each round because you have this weird like grid system where you are putting these basically like almost like these axes on within the worker placement spots to close off certain portions of the board. And then basically what you're doing is that you're trying to climb these different tracks. You're trying to buy artwork and display it in the museum, but it has a ton of very dry mechanisms on, but cool mechanisms that I haven't seen before. Like, for example, when you buy and sell this artwork, you have this awesome market mechanism that, again, I've not seen before, where you are shimmying this, you see this little colored grid on the left here. You are shimmying that token around, and that is going to basically change the points value and the money or monetary value of each colored piece of art, which I thought was awesome. You're also trying to not only fight for these worker placement positions, if you have the majority in the coins that you allocate to these worker placement positions, because when you place a worker down, it has to go with at least a coin. If you have the most money in each column, then you get the bonus at the bottom each round, which are really great things that you want to fight over, such as climbing tracks. But on top of that, another mechanism within that grid is the fact that if you create these perfect squares of worker placements, or places where people have gone, then the majority of that square are going to get points based on another track, which is like this shield track, I suppose, which is quite a significant way to get victory points. And there's just a lot of different things going on. Like there's some neutral spots as well that you can go to, which are always going to be useful. But like the first person who goes there only has to put one worker there. Second person has to put two there. And the punishment is that if you go to those spots more than anything else, the person who's allocated the most workers there has to lock one of their people in jail, meaning that you have to go to another part of the board to get them back, which might mean like getting the majority in a column is really important for you just to get more actions for your turn. And then there are other things as well, such as getting these buildings, and you can claim spots as your own. So if anybody else goes there, then you get a bonus as well. So a lot of, tried and trusted Euro things, such as the ownership of worker placement spots, but some also great things that aren't used so often, again, such as the hybrid worker placement area majority, all within the same system. I love that. It's so well executed. And a game that I couldn't really find anything that could have been removed from the game. I don't think there's anything that didn't need to be there. Very smooth, easy to teach, but still has a ton of depth there as well. And it's just a very nice game. It feels like it's I think it's not that old. I think it's only about 7-8 years old, but it feels like it's going to stand up and hold up quite well. And I'm very happy with it. Tons of different strategies you can go down as well. And it's just a really good, well ironed out, smooth Euro. That's the kind of games that I tend to enjoy.
I'm really interested in this. It feels like it's a level up of a lot of these basic Euro mechanisms, interweaving them really well.
It
Particularly
does.
the idea of, I really like the ownership. You see it in something like Lords of Waterdeep, where it's
Yeah.
very simplified, but in here it seems like there's just so many other reasons to do it, as opposed to just that initial point value. This is really cool. Can you explain what these two things are?
Yeah, so this thing here is this art market, the little coloured square thing.
Okay.
So basically, what that means is that when you sell a piece of artwork, depending on the amount of artwork that you have, you can shift it like orthogonally as many spaces as equal to that. So what
Okay.
that might mean that say you have a piece of blue artwork, you want to try and shove it as upwards as you can and as leftwards as you can, because that is where the 6 points are and where the 6 coins are. So whenever you're going for one color, somebody else is probably going for another one, which is constantly fluctuating the price. And this little wheel here are the resources required to build the buildings. So you could be saving up for a certain type of resource. Somebody builds it before you, they can rotate one of those kind of clock hands, and it will mean that next time you have to pay money instead of a brown cube, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's some very dry, but it all works really well. And as you said, with that ownership part mechanism as well, because you could have, say, a bunch of your buildings close to each other, when it's your turn to pick the worker placement spots that are in play that round, you can make sure that that area has all your buildings in it. So that's what it's very well done, very well executed.
This is so cool. This feels like a game that I'm already familiar with, but has a lot of
Yes.
cool twists to what's happening. How's the
Yes.
player count on this? What's it play to?
I think it's 2 to 4.
Okay.
I played a 4-player game, and I played a 3-player game, and it worked extremely well. 2 players, I think just a few of the like the grid size is smaller, so it's
Okay.
always going to be tighter. So yeah, I mean, and there's these cool characters as well that you can get that are really useful. But if you don't use them, sorry, if you can use them once off to get the benefit and get rid of it, or you can acquire the card into your display, meaning that you can keep exploiting the power, but you need to pay their wages at the end of the game. And if you can't, you're going to suffer negative points. So as you said, it's like a bunch of mechanisms that are familiar, but it all comes together so well, and I was very impressed.
Ooh, I need to find a copy of this. So far, this is that's not true though. Brazil Imperial sounds so good too. Oh, you've got some bangers here. This is awesome.
I think that there is a reprint of this year, Mackenzie. So there's going to be Brussels with the expansion coming out. I believe it might even be happening in Essen. So
Oh my
it's
gosh,
coming soon.
something to look out for.
Yeah,
Excellent. Oh, I'm so excited. So that is Brussels 1893. One to be on the lookout for this year. Oh my goodness. Incredible. I'm so excited. That sounds amazing. Oh, if you were to recommend a game out of the three you talked about today, Magnificent or
oh,
Brussels or Brazil Imperial, which one would you pick?
I recommend them all because I like them all, and they're all
Okay.
very different. I would maybe just say, talking about it now, maybe just say Brussels,
Okay.
but it's close. It's very close. I mean, I rate them all very well.
Okay. Oh wow. Okay. So definitely, I've already played Magnificent, obviously, but I really want to try Brazil. The theming on that one looks amazing. But this game, the Brussels, looks like it's just so solid. Like you can't go wrong with this one.
It is solid.
Oh, so exciting. Okay, that brings us to the last game that I'm talking about here, and this is a big one. This is Kingdom Death Monster. So Kingdom Death Monster, if you're not aware, is a game where you play cooperatively, fighting against the darkness as a settlement of survivors. You're going to go through 25 lantern years where you're going to have a showdown where you fight a terrible beast. You're going to skin it, bring it back to your settlement, and create all sorts of equipment, innovations, and better your settlement to eventually make it to the end of this campaign. And this campaign is going to have a gigantic boss that's even more terrifying than all of the others you've faced before. So I finally finished a campaign that I've been playing for years. And this campaign in particular was with my friend Robert. We set out saying, okay, we're going to min-max the heck out of this. We're going to win. Because I had never actually won Kingdom Death Monster before. And we did. We finally won, and I am here to give you the deets on what actually happened. So we had initially started playing with the idea that we were going to play with the sets that were going to give us the best weapons, the most damage output. We were going to ensure that we had the numbers correct. We had a plan. We had a character who played as support that was able to predict the monster's movements, predict where we were going to be hitting the monster, and then make sure that we leveled up these different weapon proficiencies to get all sorts of passive bonuses. So with all that in mind, our final goal was to use 2 characters as brawlers, which have a little bit of damage taking as well as damage output. One character that was the tank who had so much evasion that it was almost impossible to hit them, and then one character that played as the support. And that way we were able to ensure where the enemy was going to end up, and we were going to ensure that they were going to be able to take all those hits for the tank. So the tank could hopefully evade everything because they could only get hit by, I believe it was a 1 in 10 chance to actually take damage, which is pretty absurd in this game where you're going to roll a d10 for pretty much anything. So huge amount of chance to not actually get hit by anything. So this was our final loadout in our campaign. We had the character, our support, that used the cat eye circlet from basically year 2 out of 25. We had this character that was our tank who literally didn't wear any armor, but a bunch of shields, because the shields gave a bunch of armor to everything. So they were holding 3 shields as they were fighting. We had our brawler that was holding the oxidized lantern glaives. They could attack and also take some damage. They were wearing this phoenix armor to get some extra strength. And then lastly, our linchpin here that we base a lot of our strategy around was a weapon that we found really early called the Hope Stealer. And the Hope Stealer has an effect here that says at the end of the showdown, that's the fight, the boss battle, you die. Your character dies if you use this weapon. So we didn't actually use this weapon until the very last fight. But the strength of the weapon is equal to the amount of people that died during the entire campaign. So during the end of our missions, we just sent a lot of people to die. We would send them out to go fight, to go get killed. That way we ensured that this weapon was going to be gigantic in the final fight. And realistically, the final fight against this character was not that difficult compared to the other fights that we had had. The biggest thing that was the barrier to defeating this character was just you needed to have a strong weapon. You had to deal enough damage. Some of the other characters had more positioning and placements that you had to be aware of, a lot more tactics with your movement and your locations and your timing. This character was more of, he's going to hit hard, and he takes a lot of damage. So unfortunately, a little bit anticlimactic, this final fight, where it was just about having big numbers. But I'm happy that we were able to finally put a ending to this long campaign. I had a great time, but this did bring one question to my mind, and that has to do with playing in a min-max setting or leaning into randomness. And I think my preference after finishing this way is I really prefer going more random and going more into like the just attacking and seeing what happens, as opposed to the very calculated, methodical approach that we took here. And the reason I think that is because I feel that the game is a bit more exciting that way. You're not necessarily sure what's going to happen. You're leaning into those random events. It makes the highs more high. It makes the lows a little bit lower, but I do think that it's my preferred method just for that thrill and that excitement. This method clearly worked of planning everything and making sure we knew exactly where the characters were going, ensuring that we were hitting the correct locations. But for me, I think it took some of that exciting fun out of Kingdom Death Monster that I really appreciate with it. So the next time I play this, I think that I am going to go down the route that I prefer, where it obviously it doesn't work as well as this one does, but it's going to allow me to do some more interesting things as opposed to just the strictly most powerful things. So that's my takeaway from this gigantic campaign of Kingdom Death Monster. Happy that it's over. Happy that it happened. Great experience overall. But I think it's made me appreciate leaning into that randomness of Kingdom Death Monster. Dan, I know we've talked about this game before on the channel, but any opinions? Have you had the opportunity to play this? Is this something that you're going to seek out and play?
To be honest, when I hear Kingdom Death Monster, it's like some ethereal being that I just know it's out there, and I don't, I don't know anything about it. I know it's not going to be for me, and I know that the people who love it are like, this is like a lifestyle game for a lot of people, isn't it? But I always get like the vibes, like this computer game series, like the Dark Souls thing, where I could be wrong on this, but it's just a game where you have to kind of try again and keep failing, and then learn as you go. Is that
I would say yes. The first time you fight a boss, you have no idea what it's going to do.
Yeah.
So you're very much figuring out. And the discovery of it is one of the most fun portions of it. I remember the first time that I fought this character, the final boss, I was not prepared at all. And I had trained up my entire team. Yes, we're ready for it. And then the first time I tried to hit it, I missed by like 20 strength, which is insane. That's like 2 dice worth of getting like the best rolls possible. So it's bonkers. And just knowing that allowed us to plan for the future.
But what you say, you don't know what to expect, but what determines what it does? Is it like a book or something, or a card? I don't know.
So this the AI system for this game is actually one of the best I've ever seen. It's actually my favorite combat AI system in any game. It uses an AI deck of cards that you assemble based on the
Ah,
level of the character. And so based on how high it is, it's going to have a certain amount of like advanced, basic, and legendary cards. Those will get shuffled up, and that AI deck not only represents what it's going to do, but also its health. And every turn you flip a card over, and it has a very clear flow of things. It says it targets, it moves, you have a chance to interrupt, it attacks, you have a chance to interrupt, it maybe has an after effect. And these cards can vary wildly, but that's generally what it looks like. Is it's going to target something, it's going to do something, but sometimes it could be maybe a passive effect that goes straight on the board. It weakens itself because its hit location deck is, its life deck is smaller, but now it has this passive ability that's going to make things a nightmare for you. So I think there's some really great things that happen with this, and the way that they heal and deal more damage, you're able to anticipate what's going to do once you whittle that deck down. And then one of the characters we were using in particular let us look at the top 2 cards and pick which one was on top, which is super powerful. And you get that item in like the first mission, which is crazy.
yeah, makes sense. Yeah, sounds good.
But big fan of this one. I'm very excited for Gambler's Chest to arrive. I think that's probably the next time that I'll pull it out, is to play all the new content. We hear whispers all the time, but that's been since 2019. So who knows when it's really coming out. But excited to play more Kingdom Death Monster. I'm excited to explore more, but I've played this game for months and months and months and months, years now. And so I think it's time to put this one away now and start working on finishing some of those other campaign games. As mentioned before, probably going to play more Ethered Fields, probably not going to play more Trudvang. But that is Kingdom Death Monster. Sweet. So that's the what we've been playing section. Now we move on to the next section here. This is our crowdfunding picks and then our news. Starting off with you, Dan, any crowdfunding games you want to talk about?
No, I've not backed anything though. On the last episode, we did talk about Pueblo coming out again, and I did back Pueblo. So
excellent.
There you go. At least that's something I've backed recently.
I'm excited to hear your thoughts on that one. It's one that I ended up not going with because I figure that you can probably get it at retail. It looked like the exclusives weren't too exclusive. So it's one that I'll wait to hear more on. But I am excited. It does look very, very cool. And I think that the artwork and just the theming is very, very awesome. So
yeah, just
let's
different.
see.
Definitely different.
Mm-hmm.
What about yourself?
The one that I wanted to highlight in particular is a game that I played yesterday, and I've played 2 games of this morning actually, and I'm trying to figure out my opinions on it. And I think that I'm leaning more on the side of I'm not going to back this one, and that's going to be Merchant's Cove. So if you're unfamiliar with Merchant's Cove, it is a asymmetric Euro game where you are going to be building goods and then selling those goods. Your whole goal is to make as much money as possible, and you're going to do that by placing these different characters onto these boats. And the boats determine how much, the multiplier essentially on your items. You have your large items, and then you have your small items, and based on the size, that's how much money you're going to get for them. Now, Mastercraft here is going to add a new section that's going to go onto the bottom of the board, and this bottom is going to allow you to do some different things with your merchants. Whenever you bring them in, I believe you can put them on the track here, and you can spend them to get additional bonuses onto these different columns. And that to me sounds like something that I think this game desperately needs. However, I don't think it's something that, and we'll talk about this later in this episode actually, that I don't know if I want an expansion to fix a problem that I have with the base game. But maybe that is something that I'm interested in. Who knows? So that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. I'm playing through this game a bunch today. I'm planning on playing it at least 2 more times before I decide. But I'm torn. I'm torn on what I want to do with this. So it's going to take that market mechanism and hopefully open it up a little bit more. But the biggest hook about this game is the asymmetric nature of it. Every player is going to have a different merchant that they play as, and those merchants will have their own separate boards that all play very differently, but they'll all have that same outcome of producing goods. So if you are the pirate, your goal is to go find your goods. Maybe it's a treasure chest that's buried on an island, or they're fish that you're selling. Maybe you are the forge master and you're going to be using a dice placement game, and you're going to use those dice values in order to create your items. But ultimately, it's a mix of characters that have high randomness and characters that are more deterministic. And the biggest negative for this game to me so far is the deterministic characters I find to be way more powerful than the random characters. If you're playing with a deterministic character, you can look at your board, you know exactly what to do, and you know the sequences required in order to win, essentially. The only randomness that's going to come into play is the merchants that you pull out of the bag, and you can always put them into the different areas, and you're going to make the best out of your situation, of course. But with those deterministic characters, you really know what you're going to be doing. Particularly the Chronomancer is the one that comes up to my head. You've got this like small worker placement game where you have a rondel of actions you'll be going on to collect these tiles that will generate the items. The other characters, though, have very random factors. There's a character with a marble game that you're going to be playing, and the way that those marble come out, it's going to randomly occur. You're going to roll dice for that forge character, and some of the dice you need to be really big in order to get a huge multiplier to get those giant items, and sometimes those just won't show up. And then you have other characters like the treasure hunter, where the items are randomly assigned to the different islands on the board, and you're hoping that you are able to find those. And I found those characters could have some really good games or some really bad games. You could just have a very poor roll, and all of a sudden your turn is going to be terrible. You're going to waste a lot of time fixing that. So not super thrilled with those characters. And on the inverse side of that, if you're playing a character that is deterministic, it's not that fun. It's kind of boring because you know exactly what you need to do every turn, which is pretty annoying. There is a correct way to play these factions. And I find that is something that, yes, it's cool to learn them and understand what they do and how they interact with the entire game, but you're ending up doing the same thing every time. You're creating goods, and I don't know if that's something that I want to play more of. So I think just talking about this here, this is probably not one that I'm going to back, barring a friend's copy of the game. So hopefully I'm able to play this new stuff with them, and maybe I can make a decision when the expansion comes out. But overall, I think I'm probably going to be passing on Merchant's Cove Mastercraft. Dan, have you played this one? Is this one that you've seen anything about?
No, I'm very familiar with it. To be honest, I always got the impression, and correct me if I'm wrong, that with a game like this, the thing about it is that, well, the clever thing is the way that these things interact with each other, where in reality, you're probably just playing an average to probably less than average game. Just basically, there's four less than average games that are very cleverly sewn together, which is, I can imagine, an absolute nightmare in terms of game design. But as you say, individually, is the experience as good as all playing the same game? Probably not. If that makes sense. I just felt like the only way you could really make a game like this work is by having each individual part of it be relatively simple, which I imagine is not very satisfying. But hey, that's just my outside looking in impression, I suppose.
I think you're dead on the money. I think that the central experience has to be so compelling that it's going to be the thing that makes you play this smaller game. But you are really focusing on this smaller game that honestly is not that compelling. This has a direct comparison to Root with me, where I find that the interactions between the players in Root is fantastic. I think that shared deck of cards that you're using for multi-use throughout the game, the items you're crafting, the different buildings you're putting out, the idea that killing your opponent's pieces is powerful and you have this direct interaction between the players, that's super exciting to me. And here the biggest interaction is deciding where your boats are going. You're looking at the output of the other characters to see what items that they have and reducing the values. And that's about the extent of it. Figuring out where you want to send those boats. Maybe the expansion changes this with the different tracks, but so far it feels very much like players are doing their own thing in this game. The solo mode does work very well, so that's something to be very aware of. If you're looking for a solo game like this, I do find that you're a lot more invested in the solo player because you know exactly what they're doing, what they're getting, and so you can make plans. So if you are looking for something solo, I think this might be good for that. But I think that the interaction in the multiplayer experience isn't super compelling, unfortunately.
Okay, yeah, I suppose my apprehension is just.
I think you are dead on the money there. So that's the crowdfunding section. That is Merchant's Cove Mastercraft. If you've had a good time with Merchant's Cove, please let me know down in the comments below. I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about it in general, and if this is something that I need to give more plays to. So right now, I'm playing through it, trying to see if it's something that I really do enjoy or something that's just fundamentally something I don't like. But there's stuff in the back of my head that like, just play a different game. You don't need to play this. Like, you're done. Just move on, please. So that's what I'm struggling with right now. So I don't know if I'll pull out more factions and start playing more. But that's Merchant's Cove, the Mastercraft expansion. That brings us to our next section, the news. And Dan, do we have any news to talk about today?
I don't have any news now. I suppose it's all just Essen hype, I suppose, at the moment.
Basically, lots of new releases, designer diaries on new games coming out. And I think we'll talk about that more later when Essen actually gets here in October. So that's we're not going to really cover everything on the news section today. We'll move straight into card and component appreciation. Dan, what are you excited to share with a card or a component that is wonderful that you love interacting with in a game?
Yeah, mine's a silly one this episode. As I like a silly component. So this is from a game called Botswana. Also, it's an older Reiner Knizia card commodity speculation game. But yeah, I have the Botswana version of it. And this is literally just a small deck of cards. That's all you need. But for some reason, well, basically what you're trying to do is you're trying to play a card out, and then you claim an animal. But all these cards associate to a different type of animal, and the worth of that animal is going to be the most recently played card of that type, if that makes sense. But the funny thing about the version I have here is that all of these animals are like these old school plastic toys that you used to have when you were children. You know, everybody seems to have these toys, and nobody knows where they come from. It's like these giant plastic elephants, giant plastic like hippos or rhinos, I think it is. Just for no reason, it did not need to be that. It just needed to be a small token. It's just when they're on the table, they just look hilarious. And yeah, you're not going to go through a game of this without somebody commenting on why are the components this elaborate for the sake of it. It's just hilarious, I think.
I think this is a great pick, and it's definitely the thing that shines when you pull this game out. You just throw all the animals in the center of the table, and on your turn, you're generally either playing cards to strengthen the animals' values, or you're taking the animals. So it's so funny that you've got this herd of animals by the end of it.
Yeah, it's just such a weird thing, because like half the box is just these plastic animals, when all you need is like a little tuck box of cards. I just think it's so extra that it's hilarious.
I'm so happy that you featured this one, because I love games that are super extra, and this is that to a T.
Yeah.
Wildlife Safari, Botswana. Anything else to add on this one?
No, it's also a good game. So yeah, but the animals are just, it's always going to raise an eyebrow or two. Like, why are we playing with these animals?
So funny.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Okay.
So that is Botswana or Wildlife Safari, and those are the plastic animals. I think that they appear from the dollar store. That's what I want to say. That's where they come from. Maybe that's why they're in this game, is because they are so easy to get. That's so funny to me.
Oh, but they're nice. They are nice.
Hilarious. Okay, the game that I want to talk about here, the card is from Oath, Chronicles of Empire and Exile. So if you're unfamiliar with this game, this is a conquest area control game. Really, it's a tableau building game where you're going to be putting out these different cards to gain their abilities, whether in your own personal tableau as advisors or onto the board as special abilities and landmarks that you can control. You have varied win conditions and a lot of asymmetry in the way that the different factions, the Exiles or the Oathkeeper, are going to be working, and you're going to try to negotiate and hold on to these victory conditions as long as possible to hopefully win the game. And one of the coolest features of this game is every time you play a copy, it's going to be different. And I actually played a friend of mine's copy, and they had a deck that was drastically different than the one that I have in our library. And so I love that about this game, is that if you play different copies, you're going to have wildly different experiences. So one of the things that I found in this one in particular was a item card. And so as you play, you can find these different relic cards. And so some of the locations will have relics dealt to them. And so you can pay maybe favor or some of your secrets in order to obtain one of these super powerful cards. And they are so powerful that players can actually fight you to try to take them from you. Now, this card in particular that I found was so weird that everybody else passed by it. They didn't want to be a part of it because they thought it was so restrictive, but I thought of it as an opportunity. So this card is the Ring of Devotion. So the Ring of Devotion here has the ability where while you have it, you can never place warbands onto areas. So that means that you can't control things ever. You can't control a spot on the board. However, when you muster, which means you get more warbands to fight for you, you get twice as many. You get 4 as opposed to the normal 2. So you're getting twice as much action economy than anybody else. And actions are the hardest things to get in this game. You only get, I think, 8 turns in the entire game, potentially. Could end before that. So the fact that you're getting double the amount of actions when it comes to recruiting people is super powerful. This means you're going to be a threat, but that means you cannot actually control the board. And our win condition for this game, the Oath is what it's called, was to have the most areas that you control. So my whole plan this game was to get the Ring of Devotion, get a bunch of warbands, and go for an alternate win condition. So there are these vision cards that appear in the game, and if you have one of them face up in front of you and you're achieving that condition at the start of your turn, you win automatically. And so that was my entire goal, was to get one of these alternate win conditions, assemble the most giant army, or run away from everybody so they'd have to come and chase me, and then hopefully hang out and fulfill that win condition. Unfortunately, I failed miserably. The entire table ganged up on me to make sure that it didn't happen, and it was almost within my grasp. I was so close. So unfortunately, the Ring of Devotion proved to be not as as amazing as I thought, but I thought it was such an interesting, fun thing to grab, that temptation of power, but totally hindering you at the same time. So very neat. That's the Ring of Devotion, my card appreciation. Have you had a chance to play Oath yet, Dan?
No, still not tried Oath. No, only played Root out of the leader games. I take it with this ring, once you've got it, you've got it. There's no way of getting rid of it.
Unless somebody takes it from you. There's that little shield
Right.
value in the upper right where if players want to, they can attack you for your ring. They can take it from you.
And that wasn't happening.
Nobody
Obviously.
wanted it. It's kind of interesting though. Like one of the win conditions is maybe have a specific item. One of them is have the most of these relic cards. So this could have been a very key player in a different game. And who knows, it might show up in a future game based on the layout, based on what eventually ends up being saved for that next game. So, or it's going to be lost forever at the bottom of the deck. Who knows? But this is a really cool one that I had never seen, and it was great to use when it actually showed up.
I like your ambition, though, Mackenzie.
I always have to play with the weird strategy. Come on, it's just so much fun. Why would you do anything else? Excellent. So that's the card and component appreciation. And we got our plastic zoo toys from Wildlife Safari, and then the Ring of Devotion from Oath, Chronicles of Empire and Exile. Now, this brings us to our next section, This or That, where Dan and I last week brought up the question, do you prefer expansions or base games? Dan, do you want to reiterate what your opinions were on expansions versus base games?
Yeah, so I kind of said as time's gone on, I've kind of steered away from expansions, to be honest. So I did choose base games. I like variety. Completely understand the different perspective of having something you trust and just get more content for it. And to be honest, more often than not, I do. My favorite expansions are more of the same. You know, don't add more sideboards, don't add more content, new mechanisms and things. I love stuff when it's all in the same box and you get just new stuff that threads in seamlessly. I love that. But the other kind of expansions, I'm much more touchy with now because I don't play the same games over and over again too much, and it just adds more bloat and adds more confusion when you're relearning stuff. So yeah, I did go for a fresh new game. So yeah, to answer your question, I went for the base game.
So I think you covered most of the arguments, essentially. I'm on the other side of that coin. I love it when a new expansion to a game I already love comes out. It gives me more things to experiment, play with, and enjoy. And it's a system that I know works. More and more, though, I am leaning into your camp of not wanting to get expansions that fix games. And so that's something that I am more and more getting away from. So one recently we talked about on Corporate Cardboard actually was Viscounts of the West Kingdom. I'm actually probably going to get rid of that game because I think that the fact that it needs an expansion to raise it to a 6 is pretty telling that it needs to go, which is pretty bad. We went from a 5 to a 6, which is cool, but ooh, that's pretty bad. I mean, you got to bloat something so much just to fix the inherent problems with it. So, eesh. But let's see what our audience had to say about this and if they thought expansion or base game. So looking at our numbers, we've got a winner. The winner is a new base game with a dramatic 71% to 29%. And we have some comments here. My friend Dan says a great trade is something that he prefers. It's a little mix of the new base game, but also getting rid and culling an old one. The joy of getting a new game combined with the joy of getting rid of clutter. Totally agree here. If you can get rid of those games you just don't play or frankly don't like, that's the way to do it. Absolutely. And then Blue SEQ Pearl, I have limited space, so I tend to prefer expansions and component upgrades. That's something that we didn't talk about was component upgrades. Dan, how often do you get upgrades for your games? Component upgrades, at least.
Next to never. I can't think. Actually, I can't think of anything that I've improved upon or upgraded. There might be the odd exception, but nothing sprang into mind. So yeah, I'm very content with just give me some meeples and some wooden discs. I'm perfectly happy. Yeah, I'm not easy to please. I am easy to please. Sorry.
So I'm totally the opposite. I love component upgrades, particularly with games that I know are amazing because they're gonna get played. Like Burger Tokens has been one of my favorite things recently. The fact that I'm able to get something that's so easy and so easy to look at from a distance and maneuver and actually interact with, it's going to improve that overall game experience. I'm going to bring it back to Merchant's Cove. There's one portion in that game that's super fiddly where you have to seed the board with all of these little characters and put them in the boats. It's terrible. I hate it so much. You have to put them into the little seeds and it's very fiddly. Not something I enjoy. So I think that in the future, I might just not even use the boats the next time I play that game. But oh my goodness, let's see if we have any comments here. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll say I was surprised about how swingy that vote was actually, because I thought it'd be much closer than that. Because I always got the impression that people love what they loved and they just love more content for it, rather than again constantly the whole what do you call it, cult of the new mindset, I suppose. But yeah, I'm surprised it was so significantly in favor of base games.
Yeah, me too. I think that a lot of people have. I guess it's the hotness for a reason, cult of the new for a reason. There are a lot of people that are always excited to get that next thing, and it is something that we are just super excited for in general. Is trying the next best thing, which I think makes sense. We've got some comments here. Hoser40k says, "Yeah, I've canceled a lot on expansions. Never get around to playing with them." And I get that. I totally understand that. Solomon Kane is one that I have. It's the only game that I have expansions in shrink wrap for, just because there are so many expansions and the stories. I'm still replaying some of the original base game ones, so I haven't been able to get into any of those expansions. And then we have John Franklin here. Nothing beats an expansion to a favorite game that not only works well with the game, but makes you want to come back all the more. And I agree with that as well. And that's the reason that I really like expansions. We played Seven Wonders, Cities, Leaders, and Armada recently, and all of those made me want to get Seven Wonders out some more and play some more. So big fan of that. Great choice, John. Dan, anything else to talk about this? Have you cooled on a lot of expansions, gotten rid of some of them?
I've never sold an expansion, at least not without a base game, I think. But yeah, more and more recently, whenever I picked up an expansion, the more recent ones I've played, it's always been an obstacle for me to go back to it. I don't know why, because obviously it's not the intention when I pick up the expansion. I pick it up with the intention of getting it played and back to the table. But yeah, for some reason, I found like more recently, most of these expansions are almost like artificially put in there just to sell. It's like, are they really improving the overall experience? Usually not, at least not in the games that I like. Obviously, I'm sure there's tons of exceptions out there. Yeah, I felt like normally they don't add anything, they just add more. And I don't think adding more is necessarily making things better most of the time, to be honest.
Is there an expansion that you've played recently that you really have liked?
Trying to think of the real ones I've played recently, to be honest. I can't think. I can't think. Sorry, put me on the spot.
No worries. No worries. You were talking about the Bruxelles 1893 expansion that comes with the new base game. Is that one you played with?
No, I've only got the base game.
Okay.
But I've heard it's really good. And if the core game is easy enough and streamlined and refined enough, I'm usually more open to the idea of adding more content into it, because basically there's not exceptions. I hate it. I hate it when there are new expansion material that will change core rules from the beginning one, because that means that when I got to play this way, I got to remember this rules. When I play this way, I got to remember those rules. That is like a big no-no for me. So if it's like a cleaner design and it has just again add these in seamlessly, then that's something I'm much more open to, particularly when it's as I said, just more of the same, just more variety rather than additional clunkiness, or again more just shoot in material for the sake of it.
Speaking of clunkiness and shoot in material, this brings us to our next section here. This next question for this or that, and make sure to put a post on the channel so you can vote for it. But this is going to be a bit of a conversation about expansions versus second editions of game. So a lot of times expansions will be created to fix problems or maybe bolster something that was missing in a core game. And then a lot of times second editions will be created that do it as well. So the second edition, though, does require you to essentially buy the entire game again. And sometimes the features and the changes are so integral that you really do need a whole new edition of the game. One thing that I'm thinking of in particular is Great Western Trail, where they changed a lot of the cities that are printed on the board. They changed a lot of the tiles and the tokens. They changed how the cards work. And so that second edition has a lot of small things that have completely been removed. Or Atlantis Rising second edition, they completely overhauled a lot of the different tracks, the way that the different interactions, the cards work. So huge adjustments that make it a completely different game. But then on the other hand, there are expansions that do bolster things. I'm going to bring Viscounts and Paladins of the West Kingdom out here. The Garpel games do this a lot in their expansions, where they'll highlight or bring more features out to their games by adding expansions, extra card sets, boards, different abilities that are going to bolster or allow you to explore different paths in new ways. So Dan, what are your impressions on this in general? Expansions or a second edition? Which would you prefer?
I mean, I suppose it's a case-by-case basis, as you're saying. But I personally, I think I would I mean, if anything's that significant that you need an expansion to fix it, I would rather just have a clean sheet and have a new second edition. This is a new starting point. Let's forget the old one. I'm more in that, inclined to lean that way, I think. But if it is a relatively simple fix and, an expansion can essentially patch over the mistakes, whatever, at relatively minimal cost, then I think that's okay. And it's going to, make fewer people disgruntled, I suppose, if they don't have to buy the whole new game again, especially if there's like a short time frame between the releases. Because it seems like there's been some games that the second edition are coming out like 2 years after the original edition. It's like, what is going on here? But yeah, I would, on the face of it, I would say just give me a new base game, give me a new second edition.
That makes sense. And then this even leads us to the conversation of what do you think about upgrade packs, where it's all the changes to the second edition, where you can purchase this thing for maybe $20 and then replace all your core game components with this new stuff.
I mean, I think that's a great idea. I mean, that's as I said, it's going to definitely facilitate everybody being able to play the same version at an appropriate cost, because they said you don't want to waste your money saying I've got the suboptimal version of this one, now I'm going to have to buy it again. Whereas if you can just literally replace the stuff that you need to replace, that's that for me seems great. But I'm sure that's not maybe cost effective for the companies. I don't know, but hey, yeah, I mean, it's nice that they actually do that. I suppose it's a good gesture.
Totally makes sense to me. So if you have any comments or things that you'd like to share about expansions versus second editions, expansions versus base games, we'd love to hear it, and make sure that you're looking out for that question so that you can be featured on next time's Corporate Cardboard. So excellent. That brings us to our next section. This is mechanism appreciation. This is where we talk about different games that have specific mechanisms that we really enjoy, I think are really fascinating. We're here to share them. Dan, what's our first game that we're talking about?
Yeah, so I'm going old school with my first one, with Aquire. Well, the game I'm talking about is Aquire, and I'm talking about the merger mechanism. So this is a economic game where basically there's going to be these companies out there, and the bigger ones are going to start absorbing the smaller ones. But that's going to happen as the board fills up with these squares, essentially representing the actual physical companies. But I love the fact that if you invest in one of these smaller companies and then it gets absorbed by a bigger one by bridging the gap between them, then everybody who's got a share in the smaller company has to, they'll get shares, they'll get points or money, based on their ownership of those shares. So if you've got the most, you'll get a big chunk of money. But what I love about this one is that with the remaining shares you have, you can choose to trade them in for shares in the bigger company, which is probably going to be a big factor at the end of the game scoring. So I just love that physical presence of seeing how the board shifts, which companies are absorbing other companies. And I just think it's a real dynamic kind of state of play. And I just like the way it works. And I think it has a physical element to it as well as the actual gameplay mechanical side of things as well. So I love the way that works. And it's logical, I think. You can see a physical bigger company literally devouring a smaller one. So yeah, I just think it's a very cool thematic mechanism that works well.
I love that moment in this game where it happens and everybody knew it was going to happen. You saw it happening. Everybody was placing tiles, and then it happens, and then you get to see that payout. I think that's a pretty rewarding moment in games when you have those huge turning points. And I think that Aquire definitely has that here.
Yeah. I love it. And I like the whole majority thing as well. Like, obviously, this small company is going to get devoured soon. Everyone starts buying into it. But you need, especially if you're playing hidden money, like you need to think, am I buying too many shares in this now defunct company? I only want to really win by one, I suppose, because then I'll get the majority share. But yeah, I think the game is really solid. I'm a big fan of it, but particularly because of that part.
Totally makes sense to me.
What's yours then, Mackenzie?
And we have a good comment here from John.
Oh.
Aquire, what a great game. Avalon Hill played it 45 years ago. Amen to that. This is an oldie. Lots of recent games taking lots of inspiration from this. One that I almost talked about on our Kickstarter one, Dawn of Ulos, a role-player tale that is basically Aquire with fantasy factions, which is pretty compelling, actually. So Aquire, excellent. And then up next, my game here is a game that I really love. This is Arkham Horror, the card game. Specifically, this is Machinations Through Time. So Machinations Through Time is a standalone scenario that you can play, or you can integrate it as a side scenario in your campaign. And Machinations Through Time introduces a new mechanism of doing things and changing the future. So the whole premise of this is you are going to be time traveling. And so you have this area where you can jump between different time periods. And every time that you do in an older time period, you can do an action that will affect something in the future. I'm not going to get into any spoilers here, but for example, say that you decide to put something into a tree in the past, and then you go into the future area and you visit that tree, you're going to find that thing in that tree. And so that's how you're able to move things through time. You also could do something like make sure that a child eats some vegetables and gets some milk and gets set on a nice, healthy regimen. And then you go see that child in the future, and all of a sudden they're a nice, robust, strong person. You're like, oh, it's all because of those things that I did. I'm not going to give you any details on anything here, but I think that this is really, really cool. And if you like Arkham Horror, the card game, this is one that you should definitely check out because I think it does a really good job of integrating the cause and effect relationships of these things that you could do through time. You can really change the future. So I really like this idea and how you can do some small things that have big implications later. So big fan of Arkham Horror and a big fan of the Machinations Through Time's use of changing the future. Have you seen any games that do stuff like this with this very, very highly thematic mechanism?
Oh, not with like time travel, but I love the idea of it. But I suppose it reminds me of the whole Robinson Crusoe thing. You know, where you set this,
Mm-hmm.
you do something in the past, and it'll come out later to haunt you, or depending on what you did. So it's a really cool idea. Is there lots of like options to do it with, or is it literally like 3 different cards you can do? Or
There are so many different things. And it's really funny because you'll think to yourself, you'd be like, why would I do this? This makes no sense. Like, why on earth am I going to spend my valuable actions on doing this random thing? And then you eventually find something in the future. You're like, oh my gosh, I should have done that thing while I was over there. But now that I haven't, it's going to come back to haunt me. And this set does a really cool thing where it increases the variability by adding some form of like bad thing that happens to you, essentially. I'm not going to get into spoilers, but bad things can happen, and that also has its own consequences that are also going to trickle through time. So you have to figure out what you want to do and what things you want to mitigate, or if you're going to put the objectives of the scenario in the forefront instead. So some cool choices here that all have that great theming of changing the future.
sounds cool. Yeah, I like it.
It's pretty sweet. We have one more quick comment from Original Maverick. Second edition would be better than a expansion that fixes the base game in general. Original Tyrants of the Underdark expansion had off-color cards, so easy to see. Not the case with the new one. So even just some component issues. That makes sense.
Yeah, good point.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to our next section. This is the random game section. So we're going to go ahead and go to the BGG feature and figure out what we're talking about. Any predictions today, Dan, on what we're going to see?
Ugh. I've got no inspiration today. I'm going to say let's say a word game. Let's say a word game.
Word game. I'm going to say it's a game that plays exactly 2 players. That's my prediction.
I like.
I think it's safe. Let's see what shows up. Richard the First. It's 3 to 8 players, so the very opposite of just a 2-player game. All right, so this one here is England, a land so harsh that forged heroes and conquerors, where the people built are so indomitable that not even the Roman Empire managed to subjugate them. Let's skip down to actually how to play this thing. Okay. During the game, players take turns influence different characters available in order, earn prestige for themselves, also use the powers to influence the crusade. And in the game, the outcome of the crusade leads to an increase of PPs for the players who are deployed by the faction, which has achieved its goal. Amass the most prestige points by choosing alliances and exerting influence on them. So it looks like there's going to be a bunch of different characters that you're able to use and utilize. The more you utilize them, the more influence they're worth. And they're here on the board. Interesting.
I love that board.
I really like this board too, actually.
Right.
You like the Merlin board, though, so I think that maybe this is giving me some Merlin vibes with all the different characters in the center there. I like the different knights for the characters. Interesting.
Fantastic.
Have you ever heard of this game?
No, I haven't, but this looks exactly like my dream. All the pages, medieval, love it.
This is pretty cool. So Richard the First 2014 game. Let's see if it's got any ratings on it.
Oh, it looks like it's been re-implemented.
Ooh,
Oh,
by
okay.
Orkenstern?
What's that Richard game that it's been? Oh, this could be.
Is
What
it
if it's
Richard the
Richard the
Second?
Lionheart?
It is Richard the Lionheart.
Oh, I know this game. I know this
Really?
game. Yes, this game looks pretty
Ah,
cool actually. Yeah, it's like a. I've forgotten how it plays exactly, but yeah, this is a game that genuinely intrigued me for quite a long time, and I was really on the fence of picking this one up. I didn't realize it was a second edition though, or like a
go figure.
re-implementation.
Wow. Oh, interesting. This board does not look as cool as the last one.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't, sadly. No.
Wow, fascinating. Okay. So it looks like it. Are you playing as the individual characters then in this one, as opposed to? Oh, maybe there are the tracks up here that represent them instead.
Yeah, I remember having some pretty cool mechanisms, like it has some kind of bluffing or like some kind of treachery thing to it, and I can't remember what it is. It's been many years since I've looked into it, but it's definitely one that intrigued me.
Wow. I'm so curious, though. I do want to see some of the ratings here. Ratings breakdown. Let's go with an 8. Usually those are pretty on the nose. I like looking at 8s and I like looking at 5s. So let's see. Some fun. Thank you. Appreciate it. The game grows on you. If you have a group that's cool for party games, but secretly wants to play a party game. That's too cool for party games. It secretly wants to play a party game. That's a good bet.
I like it.
I like it better than Lords of Waterdeep. I categorize this game to the party gamers. It plays exceptionally well with 4 to 6 players. Have fun and enjoy. This actually reminds me a little bit of it's the game by Ivy Studios where you're all controlling demigods and moving them around, like secretly gaining the influence in them. You know what I'm talking about? Mystic Veil, not Mystic Veil, Veiled Fate. I think it's called Veiled Fate. I think it reminds me a little bit of that. If you're unfamiliar with that one.
No, I don't know it.
People watching may know what I'm talking about. Yeah, this just came out actually. I played a copy of this with my friend Ashley. But very similar idea where you are trying to bolster the strength of different characters, and you have like a secret objective of which character you're trying to bolster. So maybe it's a bit more apparent in this one. Who knows? This is all just conjecture. We have no idea what's going on. So that's our random game. Ended up at Veiled Fate and starting at Richard the First.
Yeah. Well, at least I actually know the game.
That's pretty cool.
I half know the game.
So now we go to our next section here, second to last. This is the why is this in your collection? We're both going to present a game that's in each other's collection, and then you'll need to defend why that game is in your collection. Sometimes this can be a game that's rated pretty poorly or something we're just curious about. Now, Dan, I have one for you. Why is this in your collection? My game is one that I've heard about, and I don't even know if this is the right game that I'm thinking of, but you have it rated not super high, and this is called Boomerang. I'd like to know, what is this game? Why is it in your collection? And what do you think about it? Is this one that I need to take a look at?
So Boomerang is, I believe it was one of the earlier, it's like a and write game, but it's like a draft and write game. So instead of like flipping cards, rolling dice, you're actually doing the traditional 7 wonders, pass and draft.
Okay.
And then you're ticking things off in your sheet. Like, I think there's a bunch of different versions of it. I think we've got the Australia one. And you are basically ticking off different activities that you could do to get more points. You're trying to collect these different animals to get more points. I suppose that the Boomerang name comes from the fact that every one of these cards has a number on it. And I believe you want your first card to be equal to or lower than or higher than your last card. I can't remember what exactly. It's going to give you more points. It's got this kind of push it up mechanism where if your first card is relatively high, you want the last remaining card to be high as well. Therefore, you get a bigger chunk of points for doing so.
Am I looking at the right game?
Oh, okay. No, you're not.
Because I'm like, what numbers? This does not look like that thing you're describing.
No, yeah. So I think it's called Boomerang Australia, maybe.
Oh, there it is. Boomerang Australia, 2020.
There we go. Okay, it's 2020. I thought it was more. I thought it was older than that.
Yeah, 2020.
But yeah, it's a relatively pleasant little draft and write game. Definitely, I don't dislike it at all. I don't love it. I don't think it's up there with the greats. But for a 20-minute game, it's perfectly pleasant. The game belongs to my brother, and we get out semi-regularly, and it's decent fun. It's fine. Just a perfectly fine little drafting game. I think there's better ones out there. I don't think it's overly worth your time, but at the same time, if you find it at an affordable price or you're not going to dislike it. I think it's just pleasant.
What games would you recommend over this that do something similar?
I suppose a lot of my favorite roll and write games, draft and write games, flip and write games. I kind of tend to like ones with the combos and stuff a bit more. So like, the Ganshon clever ones.
Mm-hmm.
I like Raj of the Ganges, the Dice Charmers. This one feels a little bit different because it's more of like more of a drafting set collection style thing. So it's hard to directly compare it to them because they don't really have the same feel. So I don't know. I'm struggling to compare it to anything directly, I suppose.
Gotcha. So that's Boomerang. So it's a fine one, but it's not particularly amazing. But if you find it for $1, go for it. Thank you for the endorsement, Dan.
It's just fine, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing great about it either. Just another one of those games out there.
Oh my goodness! All right, Dan, what you got for me this week?
I'm actually going to bring up a game that I played this week, which was the first time I've played it for a long, long time. It's a classic game that came out in the 90s. I think it's the 90s. Okay. This is Catan, or Settlers of Catan. Okay. What are your thoughts on this game? And do you still get it to the table regularly? Because we played it this week and it was an absolute disaster. We hated it.
So I actually played this relatively recently, about 3-4 weeks ago. Believe it or not, I have a friend that really likes it. So we pulled it out because another person had never played Catan. But Catan is definitely a game that's in our library for the reason that people really like playing Catan. There's definitely a demographic that when they hear board games, they're like, oh, yes, give me some Catan. And it's something that people can enjoy. People enjoy rolling dice. People enjoy gathering resources. It is something that it's going to get played. People like it. It makes sense to me. For me personally, I find other games that do something very similar that are better, in my opinion. I really like playing things like Space Base. I know you're not a fan of that one, but I like games where there's a bit more control as to what's going on. And I think that there are better negotiation games as well. Catan has definitely been responsible for getting so many people into the hobby. And I think it definitely has a place there. I actually realized that I was playing Catan wrong for years, though. This actually appeared on the rules mistakes video I did recently, where I had some issues with the roads completely messed up. So more details there. But I think that's really funny that even after all these years, I can never trust people who teach me how to play games because they're always going to teach me something wrong. I think the first 10 games I ever played, other people taught me, and they were all taught to me incorrectly, which is really funny to me. But hey, I guess I like them enough to want to keep on playing. So that's something. So overall, Catan is in the library because people enjoy playing it, but me myself, it's not one that I'm ever going to pull out and play. Yeah, and it seems like your thoughts are very similar on those lines. Yes.
Yeah, no, I actually 100% agree with you when you made a comparison to Space Base. Mm-hmm. So and all the games of that ilk, it feels like that kind of rolling dice and getting resource thing has completely modernized this style of thing, where you're going to get something all the time rather than just when you roll a certain number. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's a really good comparison. But yeah, I completely agree. I think that side of things has been done better with games like Space Base, with games like Bad Company and My Farm Shop, and the whole trading thing. For me, in this one, it felt a little bit forced at times. It's like, do I really want to trade with you? You're just going to benefit from it and get a point, basically. Like, I like the whole. I described it as like smoke and mirrors. Do I want this deal? Do I not want this deal? Who's benefit from it? I don't really think that shines through in Catan very well as compared to things like Chinatown or stuff like that. But I don't think it's aged very well, considering it's not that old, I suppose. But yeah, I suppose I never really had that nostalgic connection to it because it was never like a stepping stone for me to get into the hobby. So maybe that's kind of skewed my view on Catan. But hey, I know there's a huge market out there who love it.
What is the game that got you into the hobby?
It was actually Legendary Marvel.
Yeah. Go figure. That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's excellent.
Strange. What about yourself?
Very similar, actually. I think I played Catan a lot, but Seven Wonders and Marvel Legendary were two that definitely brought me in full.
There we go.
Hilariously, Seven Wonders and Legendary Marvel games that I still play all the time, and Catan is one that I do not play very often, so which is wild to me. But Seven Wonders is still really, really good. I was quite surprised at how good it still is. And Marvel Legendary is the new expansion is on its way, so that's insane that they're still coming out with
I
expansions.
know, I can't believe they're still making stuff for it.
It's
It's mad.
insane. The new Black Panther one is really good, so I hope that the Black
Wow.
Widow one is also awesome. So that's the why is this in your collection Catan, as well as I already forgot what I asked you about Boomerang. So that brings us to our last section today. Completely forgettable. Youch. See, you will never forget your game of Catan. You'll never forget how frustrated you were that you put all your settlements on a 6 and no one rolled a 6. You'll never forget that feeling. But now we'll move on to our next section here. This is the letter Y for A to Z. We're going to talk about a light game and a heavy game for each of these letters, and then talk about our opinions on them. So starting off with Dan, what is your lighter game that starts with Y? And if you're savvy and you saw our last episode, we actually skipped X because there's like no games that start with X and didn't really want to talk about them, for being honest. So we are starting with Y.
Yeah. So my two games are quite obscure ones because this is still quite a difficult letter to find games for. But these are two games. Well, the first of which I think's okay, but the second one I think is top notch. So the first game I'm talking about, the lighter one of the two, is Yspahan. Yspahan was actually, I believe, one of the forefathers of the whole dice drafting thing, because I did think many games did it before this. Rolling a cluster of dice, those dice allocated to different actions, I suppose, depending on the pip value. And then you're taking corresponding actions to how many dice were in that pool. So I like that. Are you going to take the rarer action and only do it weaker, or do the stronger one and get a bunch of them? But this is one you're basically trying to get majorities in these different colors on this like streets, or these two streets. But you can manipulate this little guard that walks up and down and kick people off these buildings. To be honest, the best thing about it was the dice drafting system. The rest of the game was okay, very dry, as you can see here. This is the version I had, actually. I actually do love the way it looks, but I can certainly see why people wouldn't. Yeah, very simple area majority style game. Trying to get your cubes to fill up these different buildings. Some of the buildings are harder to get into because the dice that you need to get into them are not rolled so often. And there's a little sideboard as well where you can collect these camels to get victory points. Very simple stuff. And I think the thing I liked about it as well was that there was a small degree of engine building, as you could get these little powers and things as you went on. But mainly boiled down to the dice drafting system, which has been reused in a game called Corinth, which I think is like a re-implementation of this game. So I like it. It's a fine Euro. I think it probably holds up for 1 or 2 plays while it's good. And then after that, you're probably done with it. But I did struggle for letters for games beginning with Y, but still, this is one that deserves some attention, I think, because it did really lay the foundation to a dice drafting game.
This is really interesting. I've never heard of this before, so I'm glad that you're able to highlight it here. Any other thoughts on this one before we move on?
It's just decent. It's nice. Another one that's nothing special.
Gotcha. All right, so this brings me to my lighter game, and I'm actually going to do a weird pick here. I'm picking a trading card game. I'm going to pick Yu-Gi-Oh! So Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that I really enjoy. I think it's super fun, but it's also a game that's got huge barriers towards it. I did a video on my channel actually talking about how I play Yu-Gi-Oh! As a board gamer, and that's through what is called the GOAT format. So if you're unfamiliar with Yu-Gi-Oh!, it is a battling game. You have a deck of cards. You're going to use those cards to defeat an opponent by taking out their life points. But this is the format that I actually really like playing this game in, and it's called GOAT format. This is a 2005 deck list, so it's a deck of cards. You can get these cards now for like $1 a piece. They're super cheap, which is great. So you can make a deck of these cards super cheaply, create 2 identical decks, and then fight head to head. And as that's what was pretty much happening during that time. Everybody was playing with the same cards because these were clearly the best, and they just happened to work well. Cool thing about this, though, is a lot of these cards work really well against each other. There are cards in particular that are in this deck particularly to counter the mirror match when you play against the same deck. So I think that's really fun. Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, instead of becoming a game of whoever has the newest, best card, it's whoever is able to not only read what the opponent has, the traps that they're setting, the timing of their cards, whoever is able to really push their luck, in a sense, is going to win the game. And I think that's super fun. So this whole concept concept of playing with an identical deck, but retaining the core experience of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think is very much present in the GOAT format. If you've heard or seen the show at all, you know there's the banned cards like Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity, all these cards that are super strong at one point, and you see them and they're super meme worthy. This deck retains those cards. You have some memorific cards in here, and you can play them against each other, and it's not completely game warping, which I really appreciate. You get to play the powerful, noteworthy cards while also having a very tense matchup because those decks are identical and the cards are relatively easy to digest. So that's my favorite, very light game. I still have a set of these decks, and I'll bring them to work every so often and play with my students, and they'll enjoy it. And so that is Yu-Gi-Oh! That is the GOAT format. Have you ever played Yu-Gi-Oh? I know you're a Magic player, but I'm not sure about Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah, I have actually. Yeah, before I got into board gaming, I played a very small window. I played some Yu-Gi-Oh! I thought it was good actually. Yeah, and I much like games like Magic in this, I much prefer the idea and concept of both having the same deck and then keep playing and trying to create a meta game with those decks where you get more familiar with it. So yeah, I'd play it if people if you had the exact balanced decks. Yeah, it's all right.
I love it. I think this is so smart, and it's definitely my favorite way to play. Cool. Dan, what's your heavier game?
Yeah, so my heavier of the two is another one from the same publisher. So one was Yspahan. This one is just, I call it Ys. It's just pronounced Y-S, or it's spelt Y-S, sorry. This is another game from Istari. So all their game titles seem to have Y-S in it to some degree. But this game is actually fantastic. And one that was one of my, I think I played it for the first time last year, and it was probably my biggest surprise of last year, how good this game was. Very cool area majority game with some bidding and bluffing, as essentially you are allocating these little wooden cylinders onto the board into these different regions. But one time, or each placement, you do one face up so everyone can see the influence you're putting down, and then you put one face down so that people have to guess what you're putting there. And you're essentially trying to get majorities in the quarters of the board, because if you do, you cut gems, and gems are your main way of getting points. But within those quarters, you've got 3 sections, and if you get the majorities within those sections, then you can get things such as special powers, and you can get these black gems, which are like set collection bonuses, on a sliding scale. And it's just a really cool game, particularly the commodity speculation part of it, because if you don't deploy your pieces onto the main board, you can actually deploy them onto the market to the side, which will manipulate the value of the gems. So if you've got loads of blues, you can say, I'm going to put my big points cylinder on this part to raise the value of blues to hopefully make it the most valuable one. But of course, everybody is competing against that as well. What a wonderful game this is. I mean, I'm surprised this one hasn't been reprinted. I think if it was reskinned and revamped and rejuvenated for today's gaming market, I think it would still do really well. Plays in about an hour. The powers are cool. It's balanced. It's fun, and it's just a really good game that I'd highly recommend.
Wow! And what's the player count like on this one?
I think it's 2 to 4. I wouldn't play it with 2. I'd only play it with 3 or 4, to be honest. It might not even cater to 2. I'm not quite sure. But
what sort of retheme do you think they might do for a game like this?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose maybe retheme isn't the right word. I think a re-skin or a new lick of paint, give it make it look nice and neat and pretty for the I think if you're going to relaunch this game again, I don't think that's going to fly with today's market looking like it does, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm not quite sure.
We're all greedy for good artwork and ridiculous over-the-top components. I get that. Yeah. I think I'm in that. Hence the whole component upgrade thing.
Get some elephants.
Amazing. Okay, that brings us to our last game here. This is A to Z for me. This is Yellow and Yangtze. This is a new re-implementation of, what's the game? Tigris and Euphrates. Tigris and Euphrates. This one here is all hexagonally based. The copy that we have has, speaking of over-the-top component upgrades, we have bamboo pieces for this one, which are so insane, but so gratifying to play. It's a very weird game, as the only other game that actually has any similarities in the action system is Tigris and Euphrates. We're going to be using these tiles to influence the board. You also have these leader tiles that are in your hand that if you hold on to them, you're going to get some sort of benefit. And if you put them on the board, that's actually how you're going to start generating points. So it's a constant decision of, am I going to start generating points, or am I going to continue to benefit from just holding these in my hand? But you do need to get points, because at the end of the game, you're only going to score for whatever your lowest commodity you have is. The game's over when that tile bag runs out, so you only have so much time to exert your influence as you're populating these different kingdoms, and eventually those kingdoms will meet and combine, and that's when these giant wars will happen. I find this one really interesting every time I play. Very obtuse when you try to teach it. Not something that you're really going to understand your first playthrough, and I think it's very interesting how you are going to constantly be wondering exactly what the point values are, because everything is hidden behind those screens. So a lot of risk and reward in this game, but one that I do find quite a lot of fun. That's Yellow and Yangtze.
Yeah, I think weird and obtuse are two perfect words to describe this game, because it's not even that complex. It's just so weird in the way you, like, the rules aren't even that difficult or that numerous, but when you're explaining it, it's like, go through that again one more time, because it's just despite being, I don't know, this game is very old. There's nothing else is like it since, again, apart from Tigris and Euphrates, which is essentially the same game. So I consider them one and the same. But I love the game, but it's definitely out there, and I have to be in the right mood to play it. But I think it's great.
I totally agree with you. And I think that it's very much you have to be in a mood, because when you play this, you can definitely pile on each other. You can definitely do some mean plays, a lot of stealing and moving the different pieces. But I do think that the tactile nature of it is very gratifying. And I love the way that the board builds up. I love the war mechanism and how you don't necessarily own the land, but you're just populating in that, and a war might happen and you are on both sides of the war, and you have to figure out which of those sides that you're going to support. There's some great moments that occur in this, and very similar to what we talked about in Aquire, how you are going to get those things, they're going to happen, and when it does, it's such a cool, fascinating experience when it does.
Yeah, very dynamic board state. Things are constantly changing, new empires, it's so different. I mean, it really is like in its own little niche. It's just that out there, but I'm
curious to see if we'll see a game that uses these mechanisms in the future with that tile placement system.
Yeah. I mean, is this game like 30 years old? Tigris and Euphrates probably getting towards that. 25 years old. 97, I think it was. So 25 years. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And still, nothing else is quite like it, despite being essentially like I suppose it's like an area majority game, but it's such a different twist on it. It's fascinating.
And that's the show. Those are all the games that we've been playing, the things we're talking about, games that happen to start with the letter Y that we enjoy. If you have any games that you want to talk about, or any thoughts or comments about the games that we talked about here, please just let us know in the comments of the video. We'll make sure to respond. And also, if you have any other thoughts about our community poll, please let us know when we post that out in the future. And if you haven't already, please go check out Dan's channel over at Chairman of the Board. He puts out reviews, cullings of his collections. He rates all of the games, the new games that he plays every month. He's got lots of positive and negative thoughts on pretty much everything that he talks about, so you're going to get a balanced opinion from him. Dan, anything you're excited about? Any games that you're playing? Any reviews that you're excited that you're putting out?
Yeah, so I've recorded a few reviews coming up. So we talked about Magnificent, so spoiler alert, I do like it, but that review's going to be coming out soon. I also played Nippon recently, which is an older Watch Your Game design. Had that on my shelf for a while, got that one played, so I know, hard off my thoughts for now. But also picked up some cool games that I've been after for a while, like Reiner Knizia, we talked about him just now. I picked up a copy of Samurai, which I've been looking high and low for, so hopefully we'll get that to the table soon as well. And also a Manhattan Project, Energy Empire, so quite a few games I'm excited for. How about yourself?
Games, well, I want to finish that game of Merchant Cove and see if this is one that I'm going to back. I think I'm probably going to lean, especially talking about it now, I'm probably not going to get that one. Hopefully you can try a copy of it in the future, but I think it's leaning towards that expansion fixing the base game that I'm not super interested in right now. Want to play more Twilight Inscription. I'm enjoying that one quite a bit, actually. I got to play a game of that yesterday, and super fun. And on top of that, I don't think there's any other things that are like grabbing me aside from, honestly, Etherfields. I just want to play more of that. I'm almost done with one of the campaigns, one of the newer campaigns, and so I could continue on just trucking through the expansion. So having a good time there. I just had a mission where I failed terribly, and it was the first time I failed in a long time. It's like, ugh. So I have to figure out what my game plan is going to be for this next attempt. But
brilliant.
Yep, super excited. Thanks again, Dan, for being here and for your time this morning. Thank you, everybody who watched us on the stream. Hoser40K, thank you so much. So happy that you were here. Same with you, Original Maverick. Thank you for being here. And thank you for the positive comments and for engaging to us throughout. John Franklin, thank you so much for being here. Everybody who was here throughout our stream, thank you. And we're excited to show more together. Episode 25 is going to be our next episode. Very, very excited in general. Any other final thoughts, Dan?
No, again, just thanks for having me on again. And yeah, it's been a pleasure. And thanks for everyone for joining in. It's been great.
Thanks, everybody. SideGame Strong.
Bye-bye.